Now, the Three Martini Lunch with Greg Corombos and Jim Geraghty.
And welcome, everyone, to the Thursday edition of the Three Martini Lunch, along with Jim Geraghty of National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Only good martinis for conservatives today. You're welcome, everyone. We're also brought to you today by ZipRecruiter. Right now, listeners to the Three Martini Lunch can try ZipRecruiter for free. Just head to ZipRecruiter.com/martini. Much more on that a little bit later in the podcast. And Jim, good martini number one. The enthusiasm gap Democrats have enjoyed pretty much ever since Donald Trump took office appears to be gone at exactly the right time for Republicans. This is from NPR. Just over a month away from critical elections across the country, the wide Democratic enthusiasm advantage that has defined the 2018 campaign up to this point has disappeared, according to a new NPR PBS NewsHour Marist poll. In July, there was a 10-point gap between the number of Democrats and Republicans saying the November elections were very important. Now that is down to 2 points, a statistical tie. Overall, the Democrats are now at 82% enthusiastic compared to 78% in July, but Republicans leapt from 68%, like we said, down 10 points in July, to now 80%. Independents have largely stayed unchanged. They're at 65%. Republican women and Republican men have each jumped 12 points, women from 71% to 83% enthusiastic, and men from 66 to 78%. Republican women are actually more excited than Democratic women. So a lot of people are chalking this up to Brett Kavanaugh and the Republicans standing behind him and his vigorous defense. So we obviously have a month to go, and we don't know exactly what will happen, Jim, but we've seen this in special elections and in some of the state races last year that the Democrats just had more energy, and that appears to be gone, at least according to this poll.
You know, Greg, a little bit earlier this morning, right before we started taping, I had a corner post go up, and it kind of grew out of a response to a longtime National Review reader and somebody who helped out with our recent webathon. This is a pretty darn good hill to die on if you are a right-of-center person, or even if you're just an American. And I don't mean necessarily the Brett Kavanaugh nomination, although that's clearly a very big part of it. I think the concept of innocent until proven guilty is very much what is at stake in this current argument. And, you know, we can argue about what drives turnout and what drives voter interest in an election, you know, for a long time. We can talk about the quality of the candidates. We can talk about TV advertising, the state of the economy, the kind of political environment, et cetera, et cetera. But I think one of the things that we're seeing here, you know, for a midterm election, there was really going to be a referendum on Trump. The economy's doing well. People aren't as focused on that. All that kind of stuff that usually goes into these things. Now, for the last 3 weeks, our politics has been over a very big question. Is an accusation sufficient evidence to consider someone guilty? I think it was, Matt Lewis, who said on CNN yesterday, we have two principles, one new and one old, that are in conflict. First is believe all women, and the other is the presumption of innocence. And you can't believe all women and believe in the presumption of innocence at the same time. Ergo, by my logic, that would say that as much as every woman who comes forward and claims of a sexual assault should be treated with respect, should be treated with sympathy, it is very much worth acknowledging that this is, I think, much more common than we ever believed for a long time, and that we want to see justice done. We want to see predators held accountable. Having said that, we're not comfortable with throwing somebody in jail on sketchy or non-existent evidence, and we should not be comfortable destroying someone's reputation over a sketchy claim or a lack of evidence. And that's this. You don't have to be a diehard conservative to believe in that. You don't have to believe in. You don't have to have particularly strong views on tax rates or immigration policy. This is something that's kind of just a very fundamental question of how do we deal with questions of justice in this country. And I think the idea, as I said a couple times this week, there's been this bet by a lot of Democrats that people would look at Brett Kavanaugh and say, prep school guy, wealthy white male, privileged elite, went to, Ivy Leagues. Never mind that, a bunch of these adjectives and labels apply to a whole bunch of Democratic office holders. But people would look at that and say, I don't relate to him, or he's got it coming, or something like that. I think what they did not count on is that a lot of people would look at Brett Kavanaugh and see themselves, and not just men and not just whites and not just people who went to the Ivy Leagues or something like that, but that everybody in the world has been falsely accused of something at some time. Hopefully, most of the time the stakes are pretty small, but they've known that pit of your stomach feeling and that desperation of, oh God, how am I going to prove my name? How am I going to get people to believe me? I've just been accused of something terrible, shoplifting. Maybe your partner accused you of cheating on them. You're accused of not having your taxes right, and they were cheating on your taxes. You're accused of coworkers saying you're not doing a good job. And people have been through things like this, and they hate it. And they know that there are people in this world who will maliciously make false accusations. We don't know if Christine Blasey Ford is one of those people, but that's one of the reasons the responsibility for proving the accusation is on the accuser. It's not up to the accused to prove their innocence. And a lot of Democrats wanted to turn that upside down in the last couple of weeks. And this, I think, as just anecdote after anecdote, Republicans are fired up and furious about this. We'll see how this affects the midterms. I've already seen one or two folks saying, I think tongue-in-cheek, that Republicans want to drag this out for the entirety of October and into November to help them in the midterms. I don't think that's a good idea. I think we should get this resolved as quickly as we can. But my suspicion is this will not be quickly forgotten by a good chunk of the electorate. In fact.
Do you need a new senator? Is that red state Democrat just not working out for you? Because you're hiring, whether you realize it or not, you're hiring in about a month. And 10 of those Democratic senators represent states that Trump won, and a good handful of them are ripe for the picking here, especially if you live in Indiana, Missouri, North Dakota, Montana. There's several out there where you guys can really do a good job of hiring. But if you need to hire in the more conventional sense, ZipRecruiter is the way to go. Because you know what's not smart? Job sites that overwhelm you with tons of the wrong resumes. But what is smart is ZipRecruiter.com/martini. Unlike other job sites, ZipRecruiter doesn't wait for candidates to find you. ZipRecruiter finds them for you.
Its powerful matching technology scans thousands of resumes, identifies the people with the right skills, the right education, and the right experience for the job, and actively invites them to apply. So you get qualified candidates fast. No more sorting through the wrong resumes, no more waiting for the right candidates to apply. It's no wonder that ZipRecruiter is rated #1 by employers in the United States. This rating comes from hiring sites on Trustpilot with more than 1,000 reviews.
And right now, 3 Martini Lunch listeners can try ZipRecruiter for free at this exclusive web address, ZipRecruiter.com/martini. That's ZipRecruiter.com/MARTINI. ZipRecruiter.com/martini. ZipRecruiter, the smartest way to hire. All right, Jim, let's move to our second good martini now, and this might be the shortest lead-in I've ever done. Here's Chuck Grassley's conclusion after seeing the updated and expanded FBI report. There's nothing in it we didn't already know. Jim?
Yeah, this is not exactly shocking. I think there is a strong argument to be said for releasing, if not the entire FBI report, then going through, redacting anything that is seen as private could be embarrassing to those who talked to the FBI and didn't want this disclosed to the public or something like that. But all in all, there's just such a level of public interest in this. I don't really think that this is the sort of information that can or will be kept private for very long. As I said this morning, if there's good stuff in there, it's going to leak from the Republicans. If there's bad stuff in there, it's going to leak from the Democrats. Having said that, this statement from Grassley is reassuring. There are comments from the White House that they were not expecting anything of significance to come out of the report. Nothing has really changed. There is no new corroborating evidence or something like that. But we're still in an area where you could have differing interpretations of the same thing. Now, from what they're describing, from the way Grassley characterizes it, you would have to really misconstrue what's in this report to look at this and say, because of this thing that came up in the supplemental FBI investigation, I cannot vote for Kavanaugh, et cetera, et cetera. I'd like to see this out there, but I'm not exactly surprised by this, and I think it's. This is why we do these. As we were having this conversation, Greg, I see this coming across my Twitter feed that Senator Dianne Feinstein has said, quote, "I didn't read the entire FBI document, but I think it was incomplete." I am not making this up. Talking about rushing to judgment, I think even her Chinese spy driver is shaking his head at that one. We knew the Democrats were going to look for some reason to not believe this FBI report that they were going to complain that it was rushed, or they missed something, or it was the one-armed man, all that kind of stuff. Hopefully we get as complete a picture of what's in this FBI report as possible. But from what we're hearing, it sounds like there's nothing in there, which should make the Susan Collinses of the world, the Lisa Murkowskis of the world, the Jeff Flakes of the world feel better about a decision to vote to confirm. They wanted this. They felt like this was an important step. Flake said this would help legitimize the process. This process seems super duper legitimate to me, but I think this is, he's chasing after a Democratic approval. It's never going to come. But nonetheless, this is good news, and hopefully by the end of the week, the confirmation process is coming to a close.
Yeah, another good martini. Not that it's actually good, but the fact that all these predictions came true about the Democrats now claiming that this was not thorough enough. Of course, you've got Dr. Ford's team all upset that they never got interviewed again, even though she testified for hours under oath. You've got Kirsten Powers saying Denny Hastert was Speaker of the House and had security clearances, and they didn't uncover multiple sexual assaults against kids. So enough with the Kavanaugh has multiple clearances talking point. So I'm hoping the FBI is enjoying its little trip under the bus, courtesy of the Democrats. But the most important reaction...
Right, but 4 days ago, these guys were the best of the best, the only people who could be trusted to resolve this. Like the Canadian Mounties, they always get their man. We saw Mulder and Scully track down every alien and Bigfoot for years. These are the people we could. And now, look, these guys, they're Keystone Cops. They can't distinguish their butt from a hole in the ground. These guys, they can't find their own butt with two hands. You can't trust them. Just one other thing, again, information's coming in as we're having this conversation, Greg. Senator Bob Corker, who every now and then has deviated from the party line, says, look, in the FBI report, there's, quote, no corroboration of any allegation that has been made. And he added that it looked like the Mark Judge portion was the most extensive, and that Mark Judge was interviewed for about 3 hours. He counted about 9 pages transcribing the Judge interview. So that sounds like it's enough for Corker. More details are probably going to come in as we continue this conversation and as people listen to this podcast. But if you believe that an FBI investigation was going to clear Kavanaugh by not finding any further evidence to corroborate the claims, things are looking pretty darn good right now.
Yes, and just watching CNN on mute here, Susan Collins says the report appears to be very thorough, and Senator Flake says, just like Senator Corker, no additional corroborating information. So things are looking up for the Kavanaugh confirmation here in the next couple of days. Mitch McConnell filed for cloture last night, so we should have a final vote no later than Saturday, assuming no other major developments happen here. All right, Jim, on to our third good martini now. And just because there's no new corroborating information doesn't mean the Democrats aren't trying to stir things up a little bit, because there is some advantage to having this be under wraps and the public not seeing it. You can say, there is stuff in here. We just can't tell you about it. But the Democrats yesterday, several members of the Senate Judiciary Committee signing a letter saying that previous background checks for Brett Kavanaugh did come up with information that was concerning either about sexual misconduct or drinking. They just decided not to specify. Could be either one. So Chris Coons, a Democrat from Delaware, the one that Jeff Flake negotiated with, we should point out he did not sign this letter, but he was asked about it this morning on Fox and Friends. Brian Kilmeade asking the question about it, and Coons explaining that there was a little something that Dick Durbin wanted to highlight, but in the end, it's nothing new.
We're now into something that is confidential, and this is a back and forth between the majority and minority about something we both sides know was in the background investigation. So there was a whiff. That doesn't clear the standard of not a whiff.
All right, Senator Coons.
Wait, can we just follow up? Why didn't you sign it? Why didn't you sign it?
I wasn't aware that this letter was being distributed last night. I've now had a chance to talk to Senator Durbin. I now know what he's referring to. This is not the sort of back and forth by the majority and the minority that is constructive, frankly, because we can't tell the public what's in the background investigation. There is nothing in here that is some bombshell that is unknown.
In other words, Chris Coons is telling his Democratic colleagues, I'm not in on your little stunt, people.
I was going to say, Senate Democrats who have managed to handle this situation terribly time and time again, perhaps Dianne Feinstein most egregiously of all, I think we should take a moment and give a little bit of credit to Chris Coons and to say that, he and Flake were the ones who came up with this FBI investigation. Chris Coons may very well have made every step in this process in good faith. And it's worth noting, I don't expect Chris Coons to vote for Brett Kavanaugh. I think only a handful of Senate Democrats will. Whether or not we like the standard of, I don't think this judge is going to make the kind of decisions that I want to see, therefore I'm voting against him. That's been around since John Roberts. That's been around since Sam Alito. Same things were applied to Sotomayor and Kagan. There was once an era in which just being a good judge and being scandal-free and answering some good, and giving good answers during the hearings, that was enough. That was the era of Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Scalia and things like that. If you want to vote against Brett Kavanaugh because you don't like the kind of judge he's going to be, that's fine. I think I don't agree with it, but I don't think that's an unreasonable position in the politics of 2018. If you want to vote against Brett Kavanaugh because you believe these allegations against him, despite the lack of witnesses and despite the gaps in memory and things like that, there's a real problem. And I think that Coons has tried to do his part to clarify this process. Again, I don't think he's going to vote for him, but I do think this is a small sign of good faith on the Democratic Party when there's been very short supply. So thank you, Senator Coons. Again, it's one thing to say I think he's a bad judge or I don't like his decisions. It's another thing to say I think he's a terrible guy who's been committing all kinds of terrible sexual assaults since he was apparently 15 going on 16 years old, if you can believe Julie Swetnick's claims.
Ooh, Jim, new drinks at the table. Chaser, here we go. One more piece of good news. In addition to our 3 good martinis, a Democratic aide on Capitol Hill, the Washington Examiner reports, faces 5 federal charges connected to maliciously publishing the private information of senators on the Internet. The personal information of 3 Senate Judiciary Committee Republicans was posted during the panel's hearings on Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh last Thursday. Jackson A. Costco, 27, most recently worked for Representative Sheila Jackson Lee of Texas, Democrat, and was formerly on the staffs of Democratic Senators Maggie Hassan of New Hampshire and Senator Barbara Boxer of California. He's been charged with 5 federal counts and 2 counts under Washington, D.C. law in relation to the doxing of 1 or more lawmakers, according to a U.S. Capitol Police news release. The charges include counts of witness tampering, identity theft, second-degree burglary, and unlawful entry. So we should point out that a lot of people thought this was tied back to Maxine Waters' office. Turns out, at least at this point, that her office had nothing to do with it. But good job by the Capitol Police here to rein this in.
Yeah, and there is something kind of worth noting about. One, is very glad that the perpetrator was caught, but also if you read conservative media for the last decade or two, you heard a lot of, oh my goodness, these crazy kids on these college campuses, can you believe this type of coverage? And they're obviously very entertaining. They certainly point to something very troubling going on in college campuses. Well, I think those people have left college campuses, and now they are in the workspace, and they are not necessarily choosing to operate by the traditional standards, mores, rules, and in this case, laws that everyone else did. They very much subscribe to this theory that, well, if I really believe this, and I'm very impassioned about this, I don't have to obey the law, and that's just not that's not the way it works, pal. And somebody had just learned this the hard way. But I do think it's very interesting, and I think it should be a little bit troubling. Because obviously, if you're representing the people of any state, you want to hire the very best, and while you want impassioned people, you don't want people who believe that the ends justify the means, and that it's okay to break the law to get what you want. And I think that doxing ranks as something that is I wonder if it is treated as seriously as it ought to be. It sounds like it is in this case. It's good to see justice done, and hopefully this will deter the next stupid staffer who feels tempted to do something like this one of these days.
Well said. And his last name is Costco, so you knew he had to dox in bulk. He couldn't just sell one.
No.
Had to. Not spelled the same. But anyway, glad to see that was taken seriously, because that could have been very, very bad for those 3 senators if, in fact, somebody had followed up on that information, given the toxic environment right now. So, Jim, hard to believe just a week after the hearings, we really had 4 good martinis today. So we'll take it.
Yeah, enjoy them when they come, folks, because you never know when the next one's going to arrive.
Exactly. And don't forget, 3 Martini Lunch listeners, you can try ZipRecruiter for free at ZipRecruiter.com/martini. He's Jim Geraghty of National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Tune in again on Friday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.